Okay, so here we are for another episode of the weekly Sonneteer, and this week, at the risk of a little self-gratification or whatever you want to call it, I'm going to read another one of my sonnets. And I gotta say, this sonnet is probably, in this run of weekly Sonneteer episodes, this sonnet is probably as modern, as non-traditional as the offerings will get. There are, these days people even break the 14-line rule. I feel like the 14-line rule on a sonnet is kind of the last rule to go. and I'm sorry, I don't go beyond that. Some people just write a paragraph of prose and call it a sonnet. And I'm like, well, if there are no distinguishing marks that connect what you are writing to what has traditionally been called a sonnet, then I have a hard time calling it a sonnet. And so I'm like, at least, whereas contemporary sonnets are concerned, at least stick to the 14-line rule. But so the one I've got for you today, which is again one of my own, is I stick with meter for the most part, though not the same meter through every line. And a lot of sonnets today don't have any meter in them. And then I drop the rhyme scheme. But enough talk about it. Let me give you the sonnet. This sonnet is what you would call ekphrastic poetry. E-K-P-H-R-A-S-T-I-C. E-K-P-H-R-A-S-T-I-C. And ekphrastic poetry is poetry written about art. So poetry like describing or written about a visual image, but mostly it's connected to art. And so this poem that I'm reading you today is what might be called an ekphrastic poem, poetry written about art. But with that said, the poem is actually about a photograph. So in this poem, I'm treating a photograph as if the photograph were a work of art. Now, if you want to look at the picture, which I've written this poem about, if you open up the link there in the email, the link in the comments section, right under the video here, then you'll see this photograph was on the BBC. And so if you scroll down, open the link and scroll down to this second photo, okay? So the second photo, you scroll down, you will see what an aerial image taken of a destroyed Russian army tank. So it's a Russian army tank that was involved in a battle, with the Ukraine, right? And it's like a destroyed Russian army tank. And so scroll down to the second photo and you'll see the picture for purposes of understanding what the poem is talking about. Okay, and of course you also see the poem pasted there under this talk. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll read the poem to you. Modern abstract. An aerial perspective on a casualty of war. A mechanized one which, understandably, no one will mourn. Like Edgar Poe's aristocrats who met the Red Death in their barricaded halls. That scene recalled to mind as, with a chill, one notes the death's head in this photograph. The glaring vacant hatches which are empty eye sockets. The leering broken grin formed by the blocks of gray reactive armor. Like something out of Dia de los Muertos, only with the festal colors turning here to rust. The grin decaying on the right to blackened gums. This modern abstract on the theme of that which fallen man continues to perpetuate. I'll go back and read it again. Modern abstract. An aerial perspective on a casualty of war. A mechanized one which, understandably, no one will mourn. Like Edgar Poe's aristocrats who met the Red Death in their barricaded halls. That scene recalled to mind as, with a chill, one notes the death's head in this photograph. The glaring, vacant hatches, which are empty eye sockets. The leering, broken grin formed by the blocks of gray reactive armor. Like something out of Dia de los Muertos, only with the festal colors turning here to rust. The grin decaying on the right to blackened gums. This modern abstract on the theme of that which fallen man continues to perpetuate. Alright, so, talking about the poem, there's no, I mean, if there's any rhyming in this poem, it's not intentional. I just did it by accident, so I wasn't attempting a rhyme scheme at all. Regarding meter, you got that first line, an aerial perspective on a casualty of war. I've got 6 feet in that line, so it's iambic. It is iambic, but it is, I guess you would call it sextameter. So it's 6 feet to a line. No, it's 7 feet. It's 7 feet to a line. Oh, okay, let me read it. An aerial perspective on a casualty of war. It's 7 feet to a line, as opposed to the normal 5 feet to a line of iambic pentameter. Second line, a mechanized one which understandably. A mechanized one which understandably. That line is only, there's only 5 feet in it, and then there's a cut off foot, okay? A cut off, so that Lee doesn't have the stressed second syllable. The third line, no one will mourn, and so I don't even wrap it around. Like you notice that you got Lee, which is the unstressed syllable, and I don't even finish it off with the stressed syllable in the second line. I just go right back to the regular unstressed, stressed feet. No one will mourn like Edgar Poe's aristocrats. So there's 11 feet in that line. Yeah, and so I kind of go back and forth. I think I kind of stick, like, who met the Red Death in their barricaded halls. Yeah, so it seems like I usually stick to around a 6 foot line, 6 iambs in a line. But again, I'm not sticking to that super hard. Some lines are 12 feet, some are like 10.5 feet. And so I'm being very, very modern here, very abstract in a sense, you know. Generally, I'm writing an iambic meter, but not with a set amount of feet per line or a set rhyme scheme. Okay, so moving past the format of the poem, which is very modern, except that a lot of sonnets these days, contemporary sonnets, don't even have meter. You know, don't even attempt any kind of meter. But looking at, so to just work through the poem here and talk about the content, an aerial perspective on a casualty of war. This tank is a casualty, you know, a mechanized one. So I admit it's not a human casualty. It's not somebody we care about. In fact, we're glad this tank is dead, probably, right? I acknowledge this is just a mechanized casualty, and understandably, quite understandably, no one's gonna have a funeral for this tank. No one's gonna mourn this tank, right? We're happy it's dead. But understandably, no one will mourn the death of a tank, just like no one mourns the characters in Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Mask of the Red Death. If you never read The Mask of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe, it's one of my favorite Poe stories. Basically, it's set during the Black Plague in Europe, when I forget what ridiculous percentage of the population of Europe died off in the Black Plague. And like the setting of the story is, or the way it works out, there's this group of aristocrats, and they are afraid of getting the plague, and so they're like, what do we do? You know, well, they go off into the countryside and lock themselves in this big mansion. You know, they make sure they got plenty of food, plenty of wine, and they lock themselves away so that none of the peasants can get in there to infect them or anything. And they're just letting the peasants die outside of this palace. But and so inside the palace, they're like, let's just eat, drink, and be merry while everybody's dying outside. So they decide to have this big costume ball, which is called a mask. You know, a costume party, another name for that is a mask, M-A-S-Q-U-E. And so the story is called The Mask of the Red Death. So they decide to have this big costume ball, and they're all dancing, all wearing their costumes. Only in the midst of it, they're horrified and very offended to see that one of the people in this ball is dressed like somebody who's dying of the Black Plague. You know, they're wrapped in you know, burial cloth and with like red bloody splotches coming through the cloth. And so everybody's like, that's very bad taste and very offended, you know. And the host of the ball comes running up and grabs the dude and is like, what do you think you're doing here dressed like this? And he strips off the cloths and there's nothing there. It's like a body walking around that is actually, you can't see it. And what it is it's death personified. It is the Black Plague personified. And so then everybody's running around trying to get out of the mansion, but they can't because they've sealed up all the doors. And so everybody dies. And so that's the Mask of the Red Death. So, again, just as nobody will mourn the death of an army tank in a war, which, you know, is a tool of destruction itself, likewise, no one will mourn Edgar Poe's aristocrats who meet the Red Death in their barricaded halls. Barricaded means you're blocked in, you've got, you know, walls set up to defend you. No one will mourn these aristocrats because they were jerks anyways. You know, they were throwing a party while everybody was dying outside. That scene recalled to mind us. So I'm recalling the scene in the Red Death where they all die. I'm recalling this scene to mind as with a chill, I look at this photograph and I realize there's a skull. There's a skull in the photograph. There's a death's head, which basically just is another term. A death's head is another term for a skull, right? You know, I look at it and with a chill, I see the death's head in the photograph. The glaring vacant hatches, which are empty eye sockets, right? The leering, a leer is a creepy grin, right? The leering broken grin formed by the blocks of gray reactive armor. So if you don't know what reactive armor is, it's like special blocks of, it's some kind of, you know, chemical composition that's put together. And what it is if somebody drops a bomb from above on a tank, these gray blocks you see there in the photograph will cause the explosion. When it hits them, they'll explode when the bomb hits them, but it forces the explosion outward. And so the explosion doesn't go into the tank, it like goes outward when it connects with these explosive blocks, which are called reactive armor. So the leering broken grin formed by the blocks of gray reactive armor. You see how they kind of make a weird, creepy, smiley face, these blocks of armor, right? Like something out of Dia de los Muertos. You know, to me it looks like the Mexican Day of the Dead, right? That celebration that they have. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just look up images of Day of the Dead, you know, type in death's head or skull with it, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you don't. But they're these very colorful depictions of just skeletons, you know. And so looking like something out of Dia de los Muertos, only with the festal colors, festive, you know, the colorful colors that they normally have on these things, only with the festal colors turning here to rust. The grin decaying on the right side to like blackened gums. So I'm like, that space to me on the right, the black part of the curve, looks like somebody's deteriorating gums in their mouth. And then here at the end, I do get a bit traditional. I've got a couplet. You know, my last two lines kind of step back from going into all this specific detail and say, so what does this mean? What is the point, right? And that's very Shakespearean. You know, the last two lines being like, so what is the point of all this? Either that or let me put this in a different perspective. So the last two lines, after I've finished all this description, this modern abstract on the theme of that which fallen man continues to perpetuate. So if you pretend with me that this photo is actually a work of art, and, you know, photography is an art, so you don't have to pretend too hard there. But what is it? It's an abstract painting. You know, it's a modern abstract on a theme, and the theme is what, you know, what fallen humanity continues to perpetuate, like what we do to each other. And what we can, you know, perpetuate is you continue something if you perpetuate it. And so the fact that we just keep killing each other and doing awful stuff on our planet. The phrase fallen man, a couple of things there. One is that's definitely coming from my own personal belief system, which as a Christian, I believe that, you know, humanity was created perfect by God, and then we sinned, you know, we chose to rebel against God, and so we are fallen. So that's concept of fallen man. Why do we kill each other? Why does evil happen? Because we were fallen, you know, so which fallen man continues to perpetuate. Man, you know, I realize it's a bit outdated these days to use the word man to encapsulate the human race. I use it there because I'm kind of like going for that old biblical feeling, so to speak, and it just, you know, fallen man is much more a common phrase than fallen humankind. You could say fallen humanity, that might work, although interestingly enough, even if you use the word human or humanity, man is still in there. So as much as we try and, so for better or worse, I went with fallen man just because it felt like, to me, like it matched better with the word fallen. All right, so that's the poem for you. You can make of it what you want as you comment in the comments sections, but I will see you next week.